analysis is that you make an analytical work. You try to find the links between the parts, okay? For example, how ZPD as a concept is related to other concepts.
Right.
So this is the analytical work, but unfortunately, what we see in the second hand Vygotsky is just interpretations rather than analytical understanding.
And two things happened for me. Like one, the idea of this theory as a system was extremely helpful. It was also daunting. It was extremely helpful because things go together, different parts. Like here's why I know I'm many years away from really understanding, because in order to talk about social situation of development, for example, you have to deeply understand 4 or 5 other concepts, because you can't properly talk about one thing without talking about the relationship between others. And familiarity with those words, that's okay, but I mean, if you have deep understanding of those 4 or 5 things, now we're getting somewhere. And that's where I'm in the I'm in the process of heading in that direction, but I'm not even close yet.
If I want to understand the content of this concept, 2 questions. First question, which aspect of the process of development this concept is related to? And the second point is that my second question is, I have to understand what are the other concepts this concept is related to, because concept does not exist alone. Concept exists in a system of concepts, and Vygotsky says about that in Thinking and Speech. He says that when we are developing theoretical concepts, we have to do it as a system. We cannot develop concepts one by one. So we develop the system of concepts. Otherwise, it leads to nothing. So how this concept is related to other concepts? Not only connection to other concepts, but also connections with some principles and laws of development. And every concept is related to certain aspect of development. So this is important, because when I say in my research I study development, I say it's nothing. Development is so complex. You cannot just study development. You have to focus on a certain specific aspect of development. But as you use a system of concepts, you are focusing on the aspect of development, but you are not losing the whole process of development, because this is your target concepts. You are targeting on a certain aspect, but because you understand how this concept is related to the other concepts, it means that you are not losing the whole.
Right.
That's why Vygotsky's concepts are so strong. They are theoretical tools we use to analyze development, but every time a certain specific aspect of development. For example, if you take the concept of the ideal form, ideal and present form, of course, you can see that this is a specific features of development, because Vygotsky says that there are many different types of development in the world, like biological development, the social development, development of society, and so on. But he says that the biggest peculiarity of the child development is that development goes through the interaction of ideal and impulse. In no any other types of development, we find a situation when the developed form interacts with the previous one. Let's take a historical development. It didn't happen in a history that ancient society was interacting with a highly developed society. So, and this is a really specific feature of development. So, and you can understand interaction of ideal and real through this aspect. If you, in your research project, want to focus on what are the specific features of development of the child, you take the concept of ideal and real, and you study in your experimental research. You are studying what are the ideal forms surrounding the child, how the child interacts with the ideal forms, what new ideal forms we can bring to the child to support the development. You see, it gives me opportunity to formulate my research questions, and then when I have collected the data, I'm using this concept, ideal and real interaction, to analyze the data. I'm looking at the child environment, not just environment, but I'm trying to identify what are the ideal forms around the child and how the child interacts, and how teacher or parent organizes the process of interaction. You see, this concept helps me to formulate my research question and to build my research settings and to conduct the experiment in the way I want to. So my second question is, what are the other concepts this concept is related to? Concept exists in the system of concepts, not only connection to other concepts, but also connections with some principles and laws of development. First, it is related to concept one, the process of development of higher psychological functions, okay? Because this is the main, the process of development. Then it is absolutely related to the idea of the social environment, because ideal forms are the parts of the social environment. If there are no ideal forms given to the child, social environment is not a source of development, okay? So when there are ideal forms and if they interact with the child, the social environment begins to be a source of development. Concept number three, social situation of development, because ideal forms should be somehow, should not be just taken as certain forms. They should be taken in the concrete situations of the interaction. And these situations might be social situation of development or might not be, because there is no automatically, if the child begins to interact with the ideal form, the job is done. No. There might be different types of interactions of the ideal and real and present forms, okay? So then you have to describe the present forms of the child. And the present forms of the child are based on developed elementary functions and developing higher psychological functions. So analyzing the child's present forms, you are coming to the idea of the unity of their lower and higher, okay? So analyzing ideal forms, you are coming to the idea of social environment and social situation of development. Analyzing the interaction of the ideal and real, you are analyzing the process of how social becomes the individual. Oh, you see how many concepts are involved here. You see the drama, you see the general genetic law even, right? And you see all these things.
It's just extremely helpful what you're saying.
For example, if you take the general genetic law and we take ideal and present form, we understand that, at first time every high psychological function appears socially. How? In a certain form of collective cultural behavior. This is the first form of the appearance of high psychological function. So this is also important concept, cultural forms of behavior. And only through transformation of the collective cultural form of behavior into individual cultural form of behavior, so high psychological functions appears. So this law of two appearances of high psychological functions is a general frame, but we can see the ideal and real ideal and present form there. So every higher psychological functions appears on the stage twice. First on the social plane, in the form of the collective form of behavior, which can be analyzed through the process of interaction of ideal and present form, and then through the transformation, and only because of this it becomes the individual higher psychological functions, which supports, which helps the child to perform the individual cultural form of behavior. You see, now we can understand general genetic law much better.
Yes, yeah. That's why you want to be fluent in this lexicon, but at the same time, to get fluent, you have to see how they all connect to each other.
Yep.
So that's why that's part of the slow spiraling process as well.
So
of developing this understanding.